The tropical night air hung thick and oppressive around Iron Bottom Sound on November 13, 1942. At 00:48 hours, darkness covered Guadalcanal like a suffocating blanket. Captain Tamichihara's knuckles had turned white from gripping the bridge rail of destroyer Amatsukaze so tightly. His eyes stayed fixed on something that filled him with cold dread. A brilliant searchlight beam cut through the black water. It moved like a sword blade made of pure light. Around his ship, American shells burst in massive explosions. Each blast lit up the night sky. Fire and twisted metal filled the air. The sounds were deafening. Steel fragments whistled past his head. The Americans were not taking careful aim. They were simply flooding every inch of sky with deadly metal. These words would appear in his personal log that very night. His hand shook as he wrote them. This truth would define how the entire Pacific War ended. Most Japanese officers could not see it yet. What happened in the next 35 seconds changed everything. USS San Francisco opened fire with her 5-inch guns. Shell after shell erupted from her barrels. The rate of fire was impossible to believe. In those few seconds, she fired more shells than some Japanese destroyers carried for complete missions lasting weeks. The Americans were not counting individual rounds. They were building walls of pure fire. These walls turned the pitch-black night into artificial daylight. Everything was visible in the harsh glare. Their gun barrels glowed bright red from continuous firing. The heat was so intense it hurt to look at them. 2,700 miles away across the Pacific, ammunition ships were already being loaded at Pearl Harbor. The next shipment was being prepared. 15,000 tons of fresh shells sat waiting. This was enough to replace everything the American fleet would fire in this single battle. Not once, but 50 times over. In Tokyo, naval planning officers hunched over their desks. They were calculating whether they could spare just 12 rounds per gun for the next convoy run. The mathematics of total defeat were being written. They appeared in brass shell casings scattered across ship decks. They showed up in cordite smoke drifting over the water. They lived in production statistics that mocked every assumption the Imperial Navy had made about fighting the United States. Captain Hara would live through this hell. He would become the only Japanese destroyer commander to fight from Pearl Harbor all the way to the surrender ceremony. He witnessed a complete transformation. This change shattered not just ships made of steel. It destroyed the entire world view of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The awakening had actually begun 6 months earlier. Few people recognized it at the time. May 7, 1942, brought the Battle of the Coral Sea. Commander Takeshi Naito served as executive officer aboard carrier Shokaku. He observed something that puzzled him deeply. It kept him awake at night wondering what it meant. American cruisers and destroyers had maintained anti-aircraft fire for 4 continuous hours. 4 full hours without stopping. They never seemed to pause or worry about conserving ammunition. Each American destroyer appeared to carry more anti-aircraft rounds than their entire destroyer division combined. The observation seemed completely impossible to believe. Japanese naval doctrine had been refined over decades of careful study. Every assumption was based on the idea that all naval powers faced similar ammunition constraints. Every navy had to be careful with their shells. The Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft gun served as Japan's standard light AA weapon. It came with strict firing protocols that every gunner memorized. Hold fire until aircraft reached exactly 800 meters. Fire only short bursts of 3 to 5 rounds maximum. Cease fire immediately when the target passed optimal range. These rules existed not because they were tactically smart. They existed because ammunition reserves could not support any other approach. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, served aboard carrier Ryujo. He had trained his gunners relentlessly on these exact principles. Each man knew their ship's magazines held enough ammunition for exactly 12 minutes of sustained anti-aircraft fire. After those 12 minutes passed, they would be completely defenseless against enemy aircraft. The Americans seemed to fire continuously for hours and hours. He observed this with growing unease that made his stomach hurt. But the full implications would not become clear until Guadalcanal arrived. There, the mathematics of industrial warfare would be written in blood and steel. The waters would be covered with so many sunken ships that Americans would name the area Iron Bottom Sound. February 27, 1942, brought the Battle of the Java Sea. This should have been a complete Japanese triumph. Tactically speaking, it was exactly that. But Captain Hara commanded destroyer Amatsukaze during this engagement. He witnessed something that disturbed him more than any enemy gunfire he had faced. The combined American, British, Dutch, Australian force operated under Rear Admiral Carroll Dorman. During the battle, they fired 1,619 rounds of 8-inch shells. These massive shells could sink ships with single hits, but they achieved only 5 hits total. 4 of those hits proved to be duds that failed to explode. The Japanese fired far fewer shells, but scored critical hits that decided the battle. Yet Hara noticed something deeply troubling for his after-action report. The Allied ships never stopped firing. They never seemed concerned about ammunition expenditure. They maintained rates of fire that would have completely exhausted Japanese magazines in the first hour of combat. They fired as if they had unlimited shells available. Hara would write these words in his memoir, published decades later. Poor gunnery skills, yes, but such incredible wealth of ammunition that accuracy became secondary to sheer volume of fire. The Japanese victory was absolutely complete in tactical terms. 2 Allied cruisers went to the bottom. 3 destroyers followed them down. But in the wardroom afterward, Hara overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Lieutenant Yoshida served as his gunnery officer. The young man was calculating ammunition expenditure on his clipboard. "Captain, we used 40% of our main battery ammunition tonight. If the battle had continued another 2 hours, we would have been completely out." Hara silenced him immediately with a sharp look. But the arithmetic was brutally clear to anyone who thought about it. The Amatsukaze had started the engagement with 2,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition in her magazines. In this single battle, they had used 800 precious rounds. The destroyed Allied cruiser, HMS Exeter, told a different story. According to survivors they had rescued from the water, she had fired over 1,500 rounds from her 8-inch guns alone. This was more ammunition than most Japanese heavy cruisers carried as their total load. August 7, 1942, arrived with devastating clarity. The Americans landed on Guadalcanal in massive force. The Imperial Navy's response revealed the ammunition crisis in the starkest possible terms. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's striking force raced south from Rabaul at maximum speed. They carried enough ammunition for exactly 1 night battle. This was not a tactical choice made by commanders. This was all the ammunition that existed in Rabaul's magazines. The Battle of Savo Island took place on August 9th. It seemed to prove that Japanese tactics were superior. In just 33 minutes of combat, Mikawa's force sank 4 Allied heavy cruisers. 1,177 Allied sailors died in the dark waters. The Japanese lost 0 ships to enemy fire. This tactical masterpiece hid a strategic catastrophe that few understood. Commander Toshikazu Omae served as Mikawa's operations officer throughout the engagement. He would later admit the truth to American interrogators. "We withdrew immediately after the battle." You believed this was from fear of air attack. The real reason was that we had exhausted most of our ammunition. We had nothing left for a second engagement. The American transport ships sat defenseless in the harbor. They were loaded with thousands of tons of supplies for the Marines. They were spared destruction because the Japanese literally could not afford to shoot at them. The ammunition was gone. Japanese forces had fired 471 rounds total during the engagement. They achieved 10 direct hits on enemy ships. This represented a 2.1% hit rate. Tokyo would later criticize this as wasteful ammunition expenditure. Meanwhile, at Pearl Harbor, Captain William Pecos Smith was overseeing different mathematics entirely. He watched the loading of ammunition ship USS Rainier. Her cargo manifest for this single voyage told an incredible story. 5,000 tons of naval ammunition sat in her holds. This included 350,000 rounds of 5-inch shells, 1.2 million rounds of 40mm ammunition, 3 million rounds of 20mm shells. This single ship carried more ammunition than the entire Japanese combined fleet would fire in the next 3 months of combat. The famous Tokyo Express runs revealed the ammunition crisis in pathetic detail. These were high-speed destroyer missions designed to resupply Guadalcanal under cover of darkness. On November 30, 1942, Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka led 8 destroyers on another desperate supply mission. The cargo manifest was discovered later in captured Japanese documents. It told a story of national desperation. Rice filled 100 drums. Medical supplies took 200 drums. Ammunition occupied just 280 drums. This was for 15,000 desperate Japanese soldiers clinging to their positions. Less than 300 drums of ammunition total. Each drum contained roughly 300 rifle rounds, or equivalent weight in other munitions. The entire Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal was surviving on ammunition deliveries. A single American destroyer could expend this amount in 20 minutes of routine combat. Captain Hara commanded Amatsukaze on these dangerous runs. He wrote with bitter frustration in his diary, "We risk 8 destroyers and dozens of lives and tons of precious fuel to deliver what the Americans probably waste in target practice." He was more accurate than he could possibly know. That same day, destroyer USS Fletcher conducted a routine gunnery exercise in safer waters. She expended 127 rounds of 5-inch ammunition during the drill. This was roughly equivalent to half a drum from Tanaka's precious cargo that men had died to deliver. The numbers were staggering beyond Japanese comprehension. Planners in Tokyo had calculated the entire war based on their own production capabilities. They assumed America faced similar limitations. Naval Ammunition Depot, Hastings, Nebraska, came online in March 1943. The facility covered 48,000 acres of flat prairie. 2,200 buildings dotted the landscape. 207 miles of railroad track connected everything together. The depot employed 10,000 workers at peak production. This single facility produced 40% of the U.S. Navy's ammunition during the entire war. In its first month of operation alone, Hastings produced more naval ammunition than all Japanese facilities combined would manufacture for the remainder of 1943. The scale was beyond anything Japanese planners had imagined possible. The facility specialized in 5-inch 38 caliber ammunition. This served as the backbone of American naval firepower. Production rates started at 100,000 rounds per month. By September 1943, it had climbed to 300,000 rounds per month. Each individual round was inspected and tested. Quality control processes rejected more ammunition than Japanese factories could produce. Naval Ammunition Depot, McAlester, Oklahoma, opened at the same time. Its focus was different. They produced larger caliber shells and aerial bombs. Monthly production figures by December 1943 told an incredible story. 50 16-inch shells rolled off the assembly lines. 1,200 8-inch shells joined them. 20,000 5-inch shells were completed, plus 500,000 pounds of aerial ordnance. Peak workforce reached 8,600 people by 1945. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Kure Naval Arsenal represented the nation's premier ammunition facility. They struggled to produce 10,000 shells of all calibers monthly. The Toyokawa Naval Arsenal had been expanded at enormous cost in 1940. It achieved peak production of 35,000 machine gun rounds monthly, plus 4.5 million rifle rounds. But this required employing 56,400 workers total. This included 6,000 conscripted school children aged 12 to 16. They worked in dangerous conditions that often proved fatal. June 19, 1944, brought the Battle of the Philippine Sea. This would provide the most dramatic demonstration of ammunition disparity in the entire Pacific War. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had assembled 9 aircraft carriers. 473 aircraft flew from their decks. Japan hoped this would be the decisive battle that turned the war around. His opponent, Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanded 15 carriers with 956 aircraft aboard. But more importantly, his task force carried something Ozawa could not imagine. They had virtually unlimited ammunition for every gun on every ship. Lieutenant Saburo Takahashi flew a Zero fighter from carrier Taiho. He was shot down, but survived to describe his approach to the American fleet. The sky turned completely black with explosions everywhere. These were not aimed shots at individual aircraft. They created a solid wall of fire that nothing could penetrate. The Americans were not trying to hit specific targets. They were filling every cubic meter of air with flying steel. The American gunners fired with mechanical precision that never varied. Every 5-inch gun maintained exactly 15 rounds per minute. Every 40-millimeter mount pumped out 120 rounds per minute continuously. The 20-millimeter cannons sprayed 450 rounds per minute without stopping. The destroyer USS Stockholm alone fired 12,000 rounds of 40-millimeter ammunition in 6 hours of combat. She also fired 20,000 rounds of 20-millimeter shells during the same period. Commander David McCampbell served as the Navy's top ace. He observed the battle from his Hellcat fighter high above. The Japanese pilots flew straight into a curtain of death. Our ships were not aiming at individual aircraft. They were creating zones of destruction that nothing could fly through alive. The mathematics proved relentless and final. Japanese aircraft lost totaled 476. This included planes lost when carriers were sunk. American aircraft lost numbered 29 total. American ammunition expended reached staggering levels. 200,000 rounds of 5-inch shells fired into the sky. 500,000 rounds of 40-millimeter ammunition followed. 1.2 million rounds of 20-millimeter shells completed the barrage. Japanese pilots rescued from the water numbered 59 survivors. Quotes from these rescued pilots painted a grim picture. It was not a battle between opposing forces. It was execution by unstoppable machinery. October 25, 1944, arrived at 0658 hours off Samar Island in the Philippines. The ultimate David versus Goliath battle was about to demonstrate the ammunition war's final lesson. Admiral Takeo Kurita led a massive surface force. 4 battleships steamed in formation. 6 heavy cruisers followed. 2 light cruisers joined the hunt. 11 destroyers provided escort. This force had achieved complete tactical surprise against Taffy 3. Taffy 3 consisted of 6 escort carriers designed for support duties. 3 destroyers provided protection. 4 destroyer escorts completed the tiny force. What happened next defied every expectation and assumption about naval warfare. Commander Ernest Evans commanded destroyer USS Johnston without hesitation. All hands to general quarters. Prepare to attack major Japanese fleet units. All engines ahead, flank speed. Left full rudder. Take us straight at them. In the next hour, Johnston would fire over 200 rounds from her 5-inch guns. Her target was heavy cruiser Kumano. She scored 40 direct hits that completely wrecked the cruiser's superstructure. Johnston then engaged battleship Congo with her remaining ammunition. She fired 30 rounds while making protective smoke for the carriers. Her gunners were not taking time to aim carefully. They were simply pouring fire at maximum possible rate. Every gun crew worked like machines. Shell after shell flew toward the enemy ships. Meanwhile, on destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland made a decision that defined heroism. "We are going in, boys. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds. Survival cannot be expected from this engagement." What Copeland did not mention was the mathematics. His ship carried only 325 rounds per gun. 1,625 rounds total in all magazines. In the next 35 minutes, Roberts would fire over 600 rounds from just one gun mount. This represented nearly 40% of her entire magazine. The rate of fire caused her gun barrels to glow white-hot from the heat. Gunner's mate, 3rd Class Paul H. Carr, served as gun captain of Mount 52. He maintained firing even after the mount lost all electrical power. He and his crew manually loaded and fired 6 more rounds. They worked until a catastrophic explosion destroyed everything. Carr was found dying in the wreckage. He was still clutching the last 5-inch shell in his hands. He was trying to load it into the destroyed gun. On the Japanese side, battleship Yamato represented the most powerful warship ever constructed by human hands. She fired her main guns in anger for the first and only time against surface targets. The exact number of rounds cannot be confirmed from surviving records. She fired dozens of her massive 18.1-inch shells at the tiny American ships, but her magazines contained armor-piercing shells designed for battleship combat. Against the thin-skinned escort carriers, these shells passed completely through without exploding. They left neat holes, but caused little damage. Admiral Matame Ugaki commanded Battleship Division 1 throughout this engagement. He wrote in his personal diary that night, "The enemy destroyers charged directly through their own smoke screens. They fired continuously, without any pause. Such expenditure of ammunition by such small ships defies all calculation and understanding." The battle statistics revealed the complete story. American ammunition expended reached approximately 20,000 rounds of all calibers. Japanese ammunition expended totaled approximately 3,000 rounds of all calibers. American ships lost included 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escort, and 1 escort carrier. Japanese ships damaged by accurate gunfire included 3 heavy cruisers that suffered severe damage. The result was Japanese withdrawal despite overwhelming numerical superiority. The production reality had reached levels that defied Japanese comprehension by late 1944. American ammunition manufacturing had achieved impossible scale. The true numbers were staggering beyond belief. The United States produced 47 billion rounds of small arms ammunition between 1941 and 1945. 41.4 billion of these were rifle and pistol ammunition specifically. This quantity was enough for 10 shots at every person alive on Earth. Monthly production figures for November 1944 told the complete story. United States small arms ammunition reached 3.5 billion rounds per month. 5-inch shells totaled 1.2 million monthly. 40mm rounds hit 8 million per month. 20mm rounds reached 20 million monthly. 16-inch shells numbered 10,000 each month. 14-inch shells totaled 15,000 monthly. 8-inch shells reached 40,000 per month. 6-inch shells hit 60,000 monthly. Japan produced all ammunition types combined at approximately 15 million rounds monthly for the entire remaining war. The Crane Naval Ammunition Depot in Indiana alone covered 63,000 acres of countryside. It employed 10,000 dedicated workers. Storage capacity included 2,000 individual magazines. These held 400,000 tons of ammunition ready for shipment. This single depot held twice as much ammunition as the entire Imperial Japanese Navy possessed in December 1941. Total Japanese ammunition reserves at the war's start were approximately 200,000 tons. The human dimension proved equally revealing about American capabilities. At Hastings, workers lived in specially constructed dormitories. They ate in cafeterias serving 15,000 meals daily. They enjoyed recreational facilities including bowling alleys and movie theaters for entertainment. Their children attended schools built specifically for the ammunition facility. It represented a complete self-contained city dedicated entirely to producing instruments of destruction. At Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, 12-year-old Akiko Sato worked 12-hour shifts filling shell casings with explosives. In her post-war memoirs, she wrote with haunting clarity, "We were always hungry from the work. They gave us one small rice ball for our lunch. We worked until we collapsed from exhaustion. Many of my schoolmates died in industrial accidents. We produced maybe 100 shells daily in our entire section. The Americans probably fired that many shells in one single second of combat. The ammunition shortage created a vicious cycle that accelerated Japanese defeat at every level. Training suffered catastrophically when every single round had to be hoarded for actual combat. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai served as Japan's leading surviving ace. He revealed the training impact in brutal detail. New pilots in 1944 received 40 to 60 hours of total flight training. In 1941, we required 700 hours minimum before combat assignment. But worse was the gunnery training situation. New pilots fired maybe 100 rounds total in practice. American pilots fired thousands of rounds during training. The contrast was absolutely stark in every way. At Naval Air Station Pensacola, American pilots fired an average of 5,000 rounds during advanced fighter training alone. Practice ammunition was completely unlimited. Trainees who showed poor marksmanship simply fired more rounds until their accuracy improved. American pilots maintained 400 to 525 hours of flight training throughout the entire war. Ensign Kiyoshi Ito trained in late 1944. He described his combat preparation with bitter honesty. "I fired my guns exactly 3 times before my first combat mission, 10 rounds each time for 30 rounds total. My first combat opponent probably fired 30 rounds in the first second of our engagement." For anti-aircraft gunners, the training situation proved even worse. Japanese doctrine required holding fire until enemy aircraft reached exactly 800 meters. This represented point-blank range for aircraft traveling 300 miles per hour. Why such restrictions? Because at longer ranges, hit probability dropped below 0.5%. This made ammunition expenditure completely wasteful. American gunners trained with completely different philosophy. Seaman First Class Robert Scott served as a 20mm gunner on USS New Jersey. He recalled his preparation with pride. "We fired at everything available: sleeves towed by practice planes, balloons floating in the sky, floating targets in the water. I probably fired 50,000 rounds during training alone. The first time I saw a Japanese plane in combat, muscle memory took complete control." I did not think about ammunition conservation. I just filled the sky with lead, where he needed to fly. Task Force 38's logistics train represented a revolution in naval warfare. Japanese planners had never anticipated anything like it. Service Squadron 10 served as the fleet's mobile supply force. It included 34 fleet oilers for fuel. 11 escort carriers carried replacement aircraft. 19 ammunition ships hauled shells. 16 refrigerated ships carried food. 8 hospital ships cared for wounded. 12 fleet tugs provided emergency assistance. 29 destroyer escorts offered protection. On July 21 to 22, 1945, Task Group 30.8 conducted what was described as probably the largest single replenishment at sea operation in naval history. They delivered 6,269 tons of ammunition in one operation. 379,157 barrels of fuel oil were transferred. 1,635 tons of provisions were distributed. 99 replacement aircraft were delivered. 421 personnel were transferred between ships. This single replenishment operation delivered more ammunition than most Japanese naval bases held in their total inventory throughout the entire war. Commander Soemu Toyoda served as Commander-in-Chief of the combined fleet. He admitted the truth after Japan's surrender. We calculated American ammunition consumption based on our own severe limitations. If we could afford 1,000 rounds for a major operation, we assumed they might have 3,000 available. The reality that they had 100,000 rounds was completely beyond our imagination or planning. April 6, 1945, brought Operation Tengo. This was the suicide sortie of battleship Yamato. It provided the war's most poignant demonstration of ammunition disparity between the two nations. Yamato sailed with 170 rounds for her 9 18.1-inch guns. This represented 130 rounds per massive gun. This was essentially a complete full ammunition load. Additionally, she carried 1,729 rounds for her 6.1-inch secondary guns. 13,500 anti-aircraft rounds completed her arsenal. This represented every suitable shell available in all of Japan. Her secondary batteries carried only 60% of normal ammunition loads. Her anti-aircraft guns held enough shells for exactly 12 minutes of sustained defensive fire. Captain Kosaku Aruga addressed his entire crew before departure. "We sail with enough ammunition for one battle only. There will be no resupply ships following us. Use every single round wisely. Make each shot count for the Emperor." On April 7th, Yamato faced 386 American aircraft attacking in coordinated waves. The first wave reported back to their carriers. Target is throwing up tremendous anti-aircraft fire. Approach with extreme caution. By the time the third wave attacked, the reports had changed completely. Anti-aircraft fire has noticeably decreased. Target appears to be running low on ammunition. Wave 5 approached the target. Anti-aircraft fire became scattered and weak. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida survived Yamato's destruction. He watched those final terrible moments unfold. The smaller guns stopped shooting first. No shells remained. The medium guns followed next. Their magazines sat empty. Even the massive main guns had nothing left to fire. Yamato became a floating target, weighing 70,000 tons. Nothing more than metal waiting to die. American carrier groups launching these devastating attacks had received fresh supplies just 3 days before. USS Essex took on 500 tons of ammunition in that single replenishment. 400,000 rounds of every size filled her magazines. Her pilots would fire 200,000 rounds of 50-caliber ammunition into Yamato alone. Tomorrow, another supply ship would replace every spent cartridge. Japan's ammunition crisis created problems that spread through every corner of society. Copper became desperately scarce by 1944. Shell casings demanded copper. Collection campaigns seized temple bells dating back 8 centuries. Bronze statues melted down. Even national treasures disappeared into furnaces. Kitchen pots vanished from homes. Door handles were pried off and collected. Japan destroyed 45,000 Buddhist temple bells between 1937 and 1945. This represented 90% of every temple bell in the entire nation. Each bell weighed hundreds of kilograms. The bronze contained 85% copper and 15% tin, perfect material for shell casings. Young Yukiko Tanaka was only 13 when soldiers came to her school. She wrote in her diary that day, "They carried away our school bell for ammunition." Teacher Yamamoto wept openly. The bell had rung for 200 years. How many shells could they make from its bronze? How long would those shells last in actual combat? The mathematics were heartbreaking. A typical temple bell weighing 500 kilograms provided enough brass for 2,000 small-caliber shells. An American destroyer's 40mm gun could fire that many rounds in just 16 minutes of fighting. Working conditions at Japanese weapons factories collapsed completely. Toyokawa Naval Arsenal saw accident rates climb to 15% every month by 1945. Exhausted children handled dangerous explosives with almost no training. August 7, 1945, brought disaster. B-29 bombers destroyed the entire facility. The attack killed 2,477 workers. Most victims were teenagers working 12-hour shifts. Compare this tragedy with American worker Mary Roberts. She assembled shells at Hastings Naval Depot. Her experience was completely different. "We worked 8 hours daily, 5 days each week. Good wages, too. $1.20 per hour. Hot meals waited in the cafeteria. Management showed movies every Friday night. We all knew America was winning the war. One shell at a time. Our production numbers proved victory was inevitable." American naval tactics evolved to exploit their unlimited ammunition supplies. Japanese tactics reflected desperate conservation efforts. Admiral Willis Lee became the Navy's top surface warfare expert. He developed area saturation concepts for nighttime battles. American ships stopped aiming carefully at specific targets. Instead, they filled entire ocean zones with exploding shells. Enemy ships could not dodge walls of steel. The Battle of Surigao Strait proved this doctrine's power. October 25, 1944, marked its greatest success. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battle line opened fire with devastating effect. His ships fired 285 16-inch shells in 18 minutes, plus 310 14-inch shells. Thousands of 8-inch and 6-inch rounds followed. The barrage continued without pause. Japanese battleships Fuso and Yamashiro carried reduced ammunition loads to save weight. They managed fewer than 100 return shots total before destruction claimed them both. Lieutenant Commander Tokuno Horishi survived Yamashiro's sinking. His description chills the blood. Shells fell from the sky like tropical rain, not aimed at us specifically. They simply filled the entire strait with explosions. We fired back into the darkness blindly. For every shell we sent into the night, 50 came back at us. Japanese tactics became increasingly desperate as ammunition dwindled. Special attack kamikaze units represented the logical endpoint of shell shortage. When conventional weapons become too precious to use, the human body becomes the weapon itself. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi created the Kamikaze Corps out of necessity. He admitted privately to staff officers the terrible truth behind these tactics. We resort to suicide attacks because conventional ammunition no longer exists. One pilot in one aircraft replaces hundreds of shells we simply don't have. The mathematics of desperation demand this sacrifice. American code breakers intercepted Japanese naval messages throughout the war. These decoded communications revealed the ammunition crisis that shaped strategic planning on both sides. One decoded message from December 1944 told the complete story. Combined fleet ammunition status follows: 16-inch shells at 15% of minimum requirements, 14-inch shells at 22% of minimum requirements, 8-inch shells at 18% of minimum requirements, 5-inch shells at 31% of minimum requirements. Anti-aircraft ammunition shows critical shortages across all calibers. Admiral Chester Nimitz read this intelligence with grim satisfaction. He remarked to his planning staff about the implications. "They are boxers with no punch remaining. We simply keep hitting until they collapse from exhaustion." Victory becomes a matter of time and patience. American planners began deliberately designing operations to force Japanese ammunition expenditure. Feint attacks and harassment raids served this purpose. These operations were not necessarily intended to achieve tactical objectives. Their primary goal was draining Japanese magazines completely. Commander Joseph Rochefort led American code-breaking efforts. The legendary cryptanalyst noted patterns in Japanese communications that revealed their desperate situation. We could predict their operations by watching ammunition requisition requests. When they asked for resupply, we knew they couldn't fight for 2 weeks minimum. We controlled the timing of every major engagement. American submarines devastated Japanese ammunition transport throughout the Pacific theater. The destruction statistics tell a story of systematic strangulation. Japanese ammunition ships sunk numbered 147 vessels. Tonnage of ammunition lost reached approximately 500,000 tons. Percentage of ammunition shipments successfully intercepted hit 55%. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton commanded USS Wahoo during her legendary patrols. He sank ammunition ship Fukui Maru in January 1943. The explosion could be seen 40 miles away on a clear night. That single ship carried more ammunition than the entire Rabaul garrison would receive over the next 3 months. Japanese Captain Tatsuoka Shimazaki commanded ammunition convoys through submarine-infested waters. He described the impossible situation facing Japanese logistics officers. "We loaded 10,000 tons of shells at Kure, destined for Rabaul. 4 ships carried this precious cargo across dangerous seas. By arrival time, 2 ships lay on the ocean floor. 1 ship limped in damaged. We delivered 2,000 tons total." American submarines claimed the rest. The psychological pressure on Japanese logistics officers proved unbearable. Commander Yoshiro Tanaka held responsibility for ammunition distribution throughout the Philippines. He committed suicide in October 1944 after failing to deliver critical supplies to Leyte. His final note revealed the mental burden. "I send empty ships to their deaths. Americans sink them whether full or empty. Our guns fall silent, while theirs never stop firing. I cannot bear this failure any longer." War's end brought production statistics that revealed the conflict's true nature. American naval ammunition production from 1941 to 1945 reached staggering levels. Total rounds of all types hit 47 billion. Rifle and pistol ammunition alone reached 41.4 billion rounds. Total weight exceeded 4.2 million tons. Peak monthly production came in March 1945 with 3.5 billion rounds manufactured. 47 production facilities operated at maximum capacity. Peak employment reached 486,000 workers across the entire ammunition production network. Japanese naval ammunition production told a different story entirely. Total rounds of all calibers reached approximately 15 million. This number represents educated estimates from surviving records. Total weight approximated 200,000 tons. Peak monthly production occurred in November 1942 with 400,000 rounds. Only 11 production facilities operated throughout the war. Peak employment reached 95,000 workers, including conscripted children working dangerous 12-hour shifts. The numerical disparity exceeded 3,100 to 1 in small arms ammunition alone. Quality differences made the gap even more devastating. American proximity fuses introduced in 1943 increased anti-aircraft effectiveness by 300 to 600% over conventional shells. Japanese fuses suffered from material shortages throughout production. Failure rates climbed to 30% by 1945. Defective shells exploded randomly or failed to detonate entirely. This ammunition disparity created psychological transformations in both navies that shaped the Pacific War's final year. American sailors developed absolute confidence in their firepower superiority. Seaman James Bradley served aboard destroyer USS Lafay during kamikaze attacks. His memories capture American attitudes perfectly. We never worried about running out of ammunition. Supply ships arrived every few days carrying mountains of shells. We joked about shooting seagulls for target practice. Nobody would care about wasted rounds. This confidence translated into remarkably aggressive tactics throughout the fleet. American destroyers charged Japanese battleships without hesitation. Destroyer escorts attacked heavy cruisers. PT boats engaged full-sized destroyers. David versus Goliath encounters defined Pacific surface warfare because David carried unlimited stones. Japanese sailors experienced the opposite psychological transformation. Lieutenant Kazuhiko Ono served as gunnery officer aboard destroyer Isokaze. He described the mental burden of ammunition scarcity. Every shell fired required careful justification to superior officers. We counted rounds like misers count precious coins. During battle, part of your mind constantly calculated whether you could afford each shot. That hesitation proved fatal in combat. The most devastating psychological impact came from witnessing American ammunition abundance. Commander Tamichi Fukuda was captured after his destroyer sank at Leyte. American forces transferred him to Pearl Harbor aboard battleship USS New Jersey. During the voyage, he witnessed a gunnery training exercise. The battleship fired 400 rounds in practice, not in combat, just training. I wept watching this display, not from shame of capture, but from understanding. We never had any chance of victory. They fired more shells in practice than we carried into battle. How do you fight such incredible wealth? This ammunition war reflected deeper economic realities that determined the conflict's outcome. America's gross national product in 1944 reached $210 billion, more than 10 times Japan's $20 billion economy. Raw figures actually understate the disparity in ammunition production capability. American ammunition manufacturing consumed massive quantities of raw materials annually. Copper consumption reached 450,000 tons. Lead consumption hit 380,000 tons. Steel consumption for ammunition reached 2.8 million tons. Explosive production totaled 3.2 million tons. Japan's entire national consumption of these materials for all purposes never approached American ammunition needs alone. Japanese copper consumption for everything reached 80,000 tons annually. Lead availability totaled 25,000 tons. Steel production hit 4 million tons, mostly for shipbuilding. Explosive production reached 200,000 tons. America produced more copper for shell casings than Japan consumed for all electrical, industrial, and military needs combined. American lead production for bullets exceeded Japanese total availability by 15 to 1. Beyond quantity lay qualitative superiority that multiplied American advantages exponentially. The proximity fuse revolutionized anti-aircraft warfare completely. Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory developed this breakthrough technology. Instead of requiring direct hits, shells exploded automatically when radar detected nearby aircraft. Development costs reached $1 billion in 1940 currency. This represented 5% of Japan's entire 1944 gross national product. The proximity fuse became the war's third most expensive program. Only the Manhattan Project at $2 billion and B-29 Intrion Fihan mine development at $3 billion cost more. Production required precision manufacturing capabilities completely beyond Japanese industrial capacity. Each fuse contained miniaturized vacuum tubes that survived 20,000 times normal gravity during shell acceleration. American factories produced 22 million proximity fuses by war's end. Combat debut came January 5, 1943, when USS Helena shot down a Japanese dive bomber with her second proximity-fused salvo. The technology improved anti-aircraft effectiveness by 300 to 600% over conventional shells. Admiral Kiyoshi Hasegawa observed proximity-fused shells during a 1945 air raid. His report reflected Japanese bewilderment. American shells explode by magic, knowing exactly when they approach our aircraft. Each explosion places itself perfectly for maximum damage. This is not conventional warfare. It is witchcraft guided by mathematics we cannot understand. Fire control systems showed similar overwhelming disparities. The Mark 37 gunfire control system equipped every American destroyer. This system incorporated gyroscopic stabilization for steady aiming. Automatic radar tracking followed moving targets. Mechanical ballistic computers calculated firing solutions. Electric servo drives moved guns automatically. Remote power control operated everything from protected locations. This system enabled accurate fire regardless of weather conditions day or night against maneuvering targets. Each system cost $500,000, more than the entire annual ammunition budget for a Japanese destroyer squadron. Japanese fire control remained largely manual throughout the war. Optical rangefinders provided targeting data when visibility permitted. Night fighting and poor weather made accurate fire nearly impossible. Captain Toshiro Miura commanded destroyers in multiple engagements. His assessment was brutally honest. We aimed by eye while they aimed by machine. We guessed distances while they calculated precisely. Every American shell was directed by mathematics we couldn't match or even understand. Ammunition abundance produced remarkable survival statistics that defied conventional military wisdom. American destroyer USS Laffey survived 22 kamikaze attacks on April 16, 1945. Her guns never fell silent during 80 minutes of continuous combat. Laffey's ammunition expenditure that day included 345 rounds of 5-inch shells, plus 11,000 rounds of 40mm ammunition. 20,000 rounds of 20mm shells supplemented defensive fire. Her gunners shot down 9 aircraft definitively. 4 additional damaged planes crashed elsewhere, unable to complete attacks. Despite taking 4 bomb hits and 6 kamikaze strikes, Laffey survived. Her defensive fire degraded most attacks before impact. Compare destroyer Yahagi sunk while escorting Yamato on her final mission. Yahagi's anti-aircraft ammunition was exhausted after 45 minutes of combat. She could only maneuver helplessly as American aircraft attacked without opposition. 7 torpedo hits and 12 bomb strikes later, she capsized with most of her crew. Cruiser USS Helena deserves special attention for her ammunition expenditure patterns. Throughout her career, from December 1941 to July 1943, Helena fired 10,639 total rounds. This included 3,460 rounds of 5-inch ammunition and 7,179 rounds of 6-inch shells. These numbers represent cumulative expenditure across all engagements, including Pearl Harbor, Guadalcanal naval battles, and Kula Gulf, where she finally sank. Helena earned the nickname Machine Gun Cruiser for her rapid fire tactics. At the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, November 13, 1942, she fired so rapidly, Japanese observers thought she mounted automatic 6-inch guns. Such weapons didn't exist. Her rate of fire exceeded what Japanese doctrine considered physically possible for manual loading. Captain Hara's observation that Americans fired without thinking while Japanese counted every round captured more than tactical differences. It revealed fundamental truths about industrial warfare's nature. This conflict was not between comparable powers temporarily advantaged or disadvantaged. This was industrial civilization crushing pre-industrial military ambition. Final ammunition statistics overwhelm comprehension. American forces expended 47 billion rounds total. This included 41.4 billion rifle and pistol cartridges. Japanese forces expended approximately 15 million rounds of all types. The ratio reached 3,100 to 1, but these numbers understate reality. American forces expended ammunition in training exercises, test firing, and harassment missions. Japanese forces hoarded every round until the moment of destruction. Americans fired to suppress enemy action, to intimidate opponents, and to dominate battlefields psychologically. Japanese forces fired only when certain of achieving decisive effects. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, August 15, 1945, citing a new and most cruel bomb. Privately, military leaders understood the atomic bomb merely abbreviated a defeat already certain. Admiral Soemu Toyoda commanded the Navy during war's final months. His admission was stark. We could build ships without adequate steel. We could fly aircraft without sufficient fuel. But we absolutely could not fight without ammunition. The Americans possessed infinite quantities. We salvaged whatever remained from our grandfather's temple bells. Kure Naval Arsenal's ruins contained a final production report dated August 14, 1945. Daily production reached 73 shells of various calibers. Worker strength numbered 423, including 200 middle school students. Status showed critical shortages of all materials. Production continued until the final day. That same day, Hastings Naval Ammunition Depot reported completely different numbers. Daily production hit 45,000 shells of various calibers. Worker strength totaled 5,800 employees. Status exceeded all quotas. Recommendations suggested reduced production due to anticipated war termination. The Pacific War's ammunition disparity teaches lessons transcending military history. Wars between industrial powers are decided not by courage, skill, or determination, though these matter greatly. Victory belongs to those with capacity to transform raw materials into delivered destruction most efficiently. Captain Hara survived to write memoirs unique among Japanese destroyer captains. His final assessment was stark and uncompromising. We brought swords to a machine gun fight, then wondered why we lost. The Americans didn't defeat our Navy through superior seamanship. Their factories accomplished our destruction. Every shell they fired announced industrial supremacy we couldn't imagine, much less match. Brass casings littering the Pacific Ocean floor tell this war's true story. Each casing bears American ordnance markings. Each represents industrial capacity that transformed warfare from art into arithmetic. Americans could afford firing without thinking because thinking became unnecessary when supply was infinite. Japan counted every round because each was precious and irreplaceable. Each shell represented fragments of national treasure transformed into instruments of war. But wars are not won by counting carefully. Victory belongs to those who can afford not to count, who can fill skies with steel and seas with fire, who can transform industrial might into delivered destruction without hesitation or limits. Behind every statistic lay human tragedy on both sides. Ensign Takayoshi Matsui commanded a 25mm mount aboard carrier Zuikaku during the Battle of Cape Engano. Zuikaku's final battle brought him 10 rounds for his weapon. He held fire as American planes attacked repeatedly. He waited for the perfect shot that never presented itself. Zuikaku sank with his ammunition unfired. His final letter reached his mother weeks later. "I have 10 chances to protect our ship. I will make each one count perfectly." She never learned he died without firing a single shot, paralyzed by the terrible arithmetic of scarcity. Meanwhile, Seaman Robert Dixon manned a 20mm gun aboard USS Essex during the same battle. He fired 15,000 rounds that day. His letter home reflected different realities entirely. "Mom, you wouldn't believe how many bullets we shoot daily. It's like fireworks shows that never end. Don't worry about me surviving. We carry so much ammunition, nothing can penetrate our defensive fire." Both young men served their nations with equal courage and dedication. But one counted rounds while the other counted victories. The difference was not character, but industrial capacity. Not bravery, but brass casing availability. Not determination, but ability to transform national wealth into naval firepower. Today, 80 years after Japan's surrender, the ammunition disparities lessons resonate clearly. Military professionals study Captain Hara's observations not as historical curiosity, but as eternal truth. Wars between industrial powers are decided in factories before they're fought in fields. The Pacific War proved that industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, generates military power no amount of tactical brilliance can overcome. American shells fell like monsoon rain because American factories produced like summer thunderstorms. Japanese shells remained precious because Japanese factories produced like individual artisans. Captain Hara's words stand as epitaph for an empire that challenged industrial mathematics with spiritual determination. The Americans used shells without thinking while we counted every round. In that difference lay not just tactical disadvantage, but strategic impossibility. Not just military defeat, but civilizational reckoning with modern warfare's arithmetic. The shells stopped falling decades ago. The guns fell silent long ago. But in naval archives from Pearl Harbor to Yokosuka, the truth remains permanent. In memoirs from Washington to Tokyo, the lesson endures. The Pacific War was decided not by courage of those who fired shells, but by capacity of those who manufactured them. Americans could afford firing without thinking. Japanese could only afford thinking without firing. Between those realities lay the abyss that swallowed an empire's ambitions and transformed the world's understanding of industrial warfare forever. The final testament comes not from admirals or historians, but from numbers themselves. 47 billion rounds versus 15 million rounds. In that ratio lies the Pacific War's authentic story. Not battles won or lost, but an industrial colossus producing more ammunition than the world had ever imagined. facing a nation that melted temple bells to manufacture a few additional shells. Americans fired without thinking because they could afford such luxury. Japanese counted every round because survival demanded such discipline. In that fundamental difference, the war's outcome was written before the first shot echoed across Pearl Harbor's waters.